What becomes of a craftsman when his hands fall silent? For Mateo Valdés, 68 years old and a luthier by blood and bone, the silence had become a shroud. It had been a year since Clara, his vibrant, laughing Clara, had been stolen by the fever that swept through Alhambra, leaving him adrift in their whitewashed Andalusian home. His workshop, once fragrant with cedar and rosewood, now lay dormant, coated in a fine film of dust, the sunlight struggling to penetrate the grimy window panes. The tools, extensions of his own skilled fingers, rested in their ordered places, untouched, accusing. Each day in the Pueblo Blanco of Alhambra was a painstaking replica of the last. Mateo would rise, the ache in his joints a dull reminder of his age, the deeper ache in his chest a constant companion. He'd prepare a solitary meal, pan con tomate, a sliver of queso manchego, eaten standing by the kitchen counter, the silence of the house amplifying the clink of his spoon against the bowl. He rarely ventured into the Plaza Mayor, the heart of Alhambra, until the shadows lengthened and the crowds thinned. From the periphery he'd watch. Children, their laughter like scattered jewels, kicking a worn football. Old men, their faces maps of sun and time, arguing good-naturedly over dominoes outside Bar El Ciego. Women, their shopping bags bulging, exchanging news with animated gestures. He saw life, a vibrant tapestry from which he felt irrevocably cut. He was an observer, a ghost haunting the edges of his own existence. Sometimes a memory would ambush him, sharp and vivid. Clara, her dark hair escaping its pins, humming an old copla as she stirred the gazpacho, her eyes crinkling at the corners when she smiled at him. Or the two of them, younger, lighter, dancing clumsily in their small kitchen to a crackling song on the radio, her laughter echoing off the tiled walls. These moments were daggers, each one a fresh stab of loss, driving him further into the refuge of his quiet sorrow. The crescent-shaped scar above his left eyebrow, a forgotten childhood relic, seemed to throb with the weight of unspent grief. His son, David, called from Madrid once a week. The conversations were stilted, a dance of polite inquiries and vague reassurances. "How are you, Papa?" David would ask, his voice tinged with a concern Mateo found burdensome. "Fine, hee-ho, fine. And you? Work is good?" Mateo would reply, his gaze fixed on a crack in the plaster wall. He offered little, unwilling to voice the chasm of his loneliness, and David, busy with his own demanding life, seemed unsure how to bridge it. The calls usually ended with an awkward silence, then hurried goodbyes. Navigating the local covered market was an exercise in avoidance. Mateo would choose the quieter stalls, his interactions clipped, his eyes downcast. The scent of fresh olives, cured jamón, and ripe figs, once a source of simple pleasure, now seemed to mock his dulled senses. He'd overhear snippets of animated conversation. "Did you hear about the concert for the Fiesta de San Juan? Or Manolo's daughter is getting married?" Each phrase a reminder of the communal life from which he had withdrawn, a life Clara had effortlessly orchestrated for them both. It was on one such grey morning, the air holding the damp chill of late autumn, that the routine was gently, unexpectedly pierced. Sofia Herrera, a woman in her late 60s with the erect posture of a dancer and eyes that still held a youthful spark, approached him near the fishmonger's stall. She had known Clara, not intimately, but with the casual warmth common in Alhambra. Her own husband had passed some years before. "Mateo," she said, her voice surprisingly firm yet kind. He started, unused to being addressed so directly. "It's Sofia. Clara used to speak of your beautiful guitars." Mateo mumbled a non-committal reply, his gaze fixed on a crate of glistening sardines. "I'm starting a new class at the Centro de Mayores," Sofia continued, undeterred by his reticence. "It's called Movimiento Vital, gentle exercises, good for the body, good for the spirit. Clara would have enjoyed it, I think." She paused, her gaze steady. "You should come, Mateo. The first class is next Tuesday." He felt a flush creep up his neck. The thought of joining a group of movement, of life, was overwhelming. "No," he said, the word emerging harsher than he intended. "Thank you, but no." He nodded curtly and turned away, escaping into the anonymity of the thinning crowd, Sofia's lingering, compassionate gaze feeling like a brand on his back. It pricked at his conscience, a tiny thorn in the thick hide of his grief. He imagined Clara's gentle chiding, her exasperated sigh at his stubborn inertia. "Ay, Mateo," she'd say, "la vida es para vivirla, no para esconderse de ella. Life is for living, not hiding from." The winter evenings grew longer, colder, the silence in the small house pressing in on him. One Tuesday, driven by a loneliness so acute it felt like a physical hunger, and a flicker of something he couldn't name, perhaps a desperate, unacknowledged hope, he found himself standing outside the Centro de Mayores. He slipped into Sofia's Movimiento Vital class late, hoping to go unnoticed. The room was bright, filled with a surprising number of seniors, mostly women, their faces a mixture of concentration and quiet amusement. Sofia, dressed in comfortable leggings and a flowing top, moved with a fluid grace that belied her years. Matteo felt clumsy, his limbs stiff, his body a stranger. He followed the gentle stretches and movements awkwardly, acutely aware of his own physical decline. Yet, as he glanced around, he saw others struggling too. A woman with a cane, a man whose breathing was laboured, but they were there, participating, occasionally sharing a smile or a soft laugh. Sofia's instructions were clear, her encouragement warm and inclusive. She acknowledged his presence with a welcoming nod, but didn't single him out, for which he was grateful. He left before the class ended, a strange mix of exhaustion and a faint, unfamiliar lightness in his chest. Seeking to escape the confines of his house and the well-meaning, if sometimes intrusive, concern of Alumbra's inhabitants, Matteo began taking long, aimless walks into the rolling hills surrounding the village. The Andalusian countryside, even in the muted tones of winter, possessed a stark beauty. Olive groves, their silver-green leaves shimmering in the pale sun, stretched as far as the eye could see, punctuated by the dark silhouettes of cypress trees. It was on one of these rambles that he stumbled upon a hidden gem. Don Rafael Ortiz's Huerto Comunitario, a thriving community garden nestled in a sheltered valley on the outskirts of Alumbra. Don Rafael, a wiry octogenarian widower with eyes as clear and blue as the Andalusian sky and hands gnarled like ancient olive roots, was a fixture in his garden. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, tending his rows of winter greens, his broad beans, his fragrant herbs. Matteo, initially hesitant, found himself drawn to the garden's quiet industry. Don Rafael, sensing Matteo's solitude rather than questioning it, greeted him with a simple nod and continued his work. Gradually, conversations began as unforced as the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. They spoke of the weather, the stubbornness of certain weeds, the best way to coax sweetness from a winter tomato. Don Rafael, with his earthy humour and quiet wisdom, never pried. He simply offered companionship, the unspoken understanding of a man who had also known loss and had found solace in the nurturing embrace of the earth. Matteo found himself looking forward to these visits, the scent of damp soil and crushed rosemary a balm to his frayed spirit. He began to offer small, unsolicited help, weeding a patch here, carrying a watering can there. The physical work, though modest, felt good, grounding him in the present moment. Don Rafael would often share the produce of his labour, a handful of vibrant chard, a few knobbly lemons. "For your soup, Matteo," he'd say, his smile genuine. He spoke often of pequeñas alegrías, little joys. The modest income from selling surplus vegetables at the market wasn't for saving, he explained, but for these small pleasures, a good cup of coffee at his favourite bar, a new book of poetry, a small gift for a grandchild, or simply sharing with neighbours. It was a philosophy of quiet contentment that resonated deeply within Matteo, a counterpoint to the gnawing emptiness he had carried for so long. One afternoon, Sofia approached Matteo after her class. "Matteo," she began, her tone gentle, "the old guitar we have at the Centro, it's seen better days. A string is broken and it sounds a bit sad." She paused, her gaze direct. "I know it's a lot to ask, but since you were a luthier, would you perhaps look at it?" The request hit Matteo like a physical blow. His workshop, his tools, the ghosts. He hadn't touched an instrument with intent since Clara's passing. The very thought made his hands tremble. I don't know, Sofia," he stammered. "It's been a long time. Just a look," she pressed softly. "No obligation." He wanted to refuse, to retreat back into the safety of his disengagement. But Sofia's hopeful expression and a strange, unwelcome flicker of professional pride made him hesitate. He remembered the satisfaction of bringing an old, battered instrument back to life, the joy of hearing its first clear notes after restoration. Reluctantly, he agreed. "All right," he conceded, the word feeling heavy on his tongue. "I'll look at it." The guitar, when Sofia brought it to his house, was indeed a sorry specimen, cheap, scarred, its strings dull. He carried it into his workshop, the air thick with the scent of dust and disuse. For a long moment he just stood there, the instrument in his hands, surrounded by the silent witnesses of his former life. Cobwebs draped the corners. A fine layer of grime coated every surface. His cherished tools, chisels, planes, calipers, lay in their racks, their polished steel dulled. The pain was a fresh wave, threatening to drown him. He almost turned and walked out. But then he ran a hand over the guitar's worn spruce top. He felt the grain of the wood, the subtle imperfections. His fingers, as if by instinct, found the loose tuning peg, the fretboard's familiar curve. A lifetime of skill, of intimate knowledge, resided in those hands. He took a deep breath. It was just wood, wire, and varnish. He could do this. He spent a few hours on it, working slowly, methodically. He replaced the broken string, tightened loose pegs, cleaned the fretboard, polished the faded wood. His movements were initially stiff, uncertain, but gradually the old rhythms returned. The familiar scents of lemon oil and beeswax began to permeate the dusty air. He didn't allow himself to feel too much, focusing purely on the mechanics, the craft. When he was done, the guitar was still humble, but it was playable, its voice clearer, less mournful. He felt a sliver of something akin to satisfaction, a feeling so long absent he barely recognized it. He continued, almost unconsciously, to attend Sophia's classes. The movements became a little easier, his body less resistant. He even found himself anticipating the gentle camaraderie, the shared effort. He also became a more regular presence in Don Raphael's garden, finding a quiet purpose in the simple, repetitive tasks. The winter sun, when it broke through the clouds, felt warm on his face. He started noticing small things again, the intricate patterns of frost on a fallen leaf, the cheerful chirp of a robin, the distant peal of Alumbra's church bells. Sophia, ever observant, introduced the sonnerie exercise one day in class, inspired by something she'd read. Like this, she demonstrated, her eyes crinkling, her mouth curving into a genuine smile. Even if you don't feel it at first, the muscles remember. The group attempted it, some with self-conscious giggles, others with solemn concentration. Matteo, caught off guard, found himself mirroring the expression. It felt alien on his face, a stretch of unused muscles. Then, catching Don Raphael's equally awkward attempt from across the room, a rusty chuckle escaped him. It was a small sound, but it was laughter, his own. Sophia beamed. His phone calls with David gradually changed. Matteo found himself sharing small details about a particularly stubborn weed in Don Raphael's garden, or a funny anecdote from Sophia's class. David, sensing the shift, began to ask more questions, his voice losing some of its strained formality. "It sounds good, Papa," David said one evening, a note of surprised relief in his tone. "It sounds like you're keeping busy." "One does what one can. Hiyo!" Matteo replied, but there was a lightness in his own voice that hadn't been there for a long, long time. As winter began to cede to the first tentative breaths of spring, a new challenge loomed, the anniversary of Clara's death. It fell close to Alumbra's beloved Fiesta de la Primavera, a festival Clara had always adored, with its vibrant parades of flowers and the scent of orange blossoms heavy in the air. The approaching dates cast a long shadow over Matteo's fragile progress. The grief, which had receded to a dull ache, returned with a vengeance, sharp and incapacitating. He retreated once more into his shell, missing Sophia's classes, avoiding Don Raphael's garden. The silence in his house became oppressive again. Sophia and Don Raphael, however, did not abandon him. They understood. A small pot of Sophia's hearty lentejas appeared on his doorstep one evening. Don Raphael left a bouquet of the first wild narcissi from the hills by his gate. No words, just quiet gestures of support that spoke volumes. One afternoon, lost in a fog of sorrow, Matteo found himself clearing out a drawer in Clara's old dressing table, a task he had avoided for a year. Tucked beneath a pile of her soft woolen shawls, his fingers brushed against something small and hard. It was a tiny, intricately carved wooden bird, no bigger than his thumb, its painted feathers faded but still beautiful. He remembered her finding it in a dusty antique shop in Granada, her delight in its simple charm. She had kept it on her bedside table. Holding it now, so fragile and yet so enduring, a wave of profound tenderness washed over him. In the same drawer he found an old leather-bound notebook. Inside, pressed between the pages, were wildflowers, Delicate poppies, sprigs of lavender, tiny blue forget-me-nots, their colours muted by time. And in Clara's elegant, sloping handwriting, there were quotes, underlined passages from books she'd loved, lines brimming with optimism, with a fierce love for life. No llores porque se terminó, sonrí porque sucedió. Don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened. Reading her words, holding the small bird, Mateo felt something shift deep within him. The raw agony of her absence remained, but it was now accompanied by a new, insistent whisper. A desire not just to mourn her, but to honour her spirit, her unwavering belief in the beauty and preciousness of life. He owed her that. He owed it to himself. A fragile resolve began to take root. He looked at the senior centre's guitar, propped in a corner of his living room. It needed more than just a quick fix. It needed care, and perhaps so did he. The next morning, Mateo walked into his workshop. He threw open the shutters, letting in a flood of pale spring sunlight. He took a deep breath, the scent of dust and disuse still heavy, but now mingled with the fresh green aroma of the burgeoning spring outside. He began to clean. He swept away cobwebs, wiped down surfaces, organised his tools. The physical labour was cathartic. As he worked, he uncovered forgotten treasures, blocks of rare wood he'd been saving for a special project, half-finished instruments, sketches for new designs. Then he turned his attention to the senior centre's guitar. He worked meticulously, his movements becoming more fluid, more confident. He planed a slightly warped edge, reglued a loose brace, carefully sanded and revarnished worn patches. The familiar scents of cedar, rosewood, cypress and warm varnish filled the air, a fragrant balm to his soul. His hands, stiff at first, rediscovered their old cunning, the intimate dance between craftsman and material. It was challenging, demanding his full concentration, but it was also deeply, profoundly comforting. He was creating again, breathing life back into something broken. When he finally presented the restored guitar at the Centro de Mayores, it was met with gasps of admiration. It wasn't a masterpiece, but it glowed with care, its voice now warm and resonant. Sophia's eyes shone. Mateo, her voice thick with emotion, "It's beautiful. You have magic in your hands." The genuine appreciation warmed him. Later, Sophia, ever the gentle strategist, approached him. "Some of the others were asking," she said casually. "They were so impressed. They wondered if you might show them a little about how to care for their own instruments, or perhaps even teach a few simple chords." A year ago, even a month ago, he would have recoiled, but now something had shifted. The thought of sharing his lifelong passion, of connecting with others through the language of music he knew so well, no longer seemed daunting. It felt right. "Perhaps," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. "Perhaps I could." He started small, offering informal advice, showing a few interested seniors how to change a string, how to tune their instruments. To his surprise, he found a quiet satisfaction in their eager questions, in seeing the spark of understanding in their eyes. He even started attending a local history lecture series with Don Rafael, his mind, long fallow, slowly reawakening to new ideas, new connections. Alhambra, the village he had hidden from, was slowly, gently, drawing him back into its embrace. The Fiesta de San Juan arrived with the full heat of early summer. Alhambra shimmered under a sky of intense, cloudless blue. The Plaza Mayor was strung with coloured lanterns and fragrant with the scent of grilled sardines and sweet buñuelos. Laughter and the chatter of excited voices mingled with the distant strains of a flamenco guitar. Tonight, the village would celebrate with bonfires, music and dancing, a tradition stretching back centuries. Sophia's Movimiento Vital group was scheduled to perform a simple, charming folk dance they had been practicing for weeks. Mateo, standing near the edge of the plaza with Don Rafael, watched them with a warmth that surprised him. He felt a part of it, no longer an outsider. The senior whose guitar he had so carefully restored, a shy man named Miguel, was also due to play a short piece. Mateo felt a nervous flutter in his own stomach. Sophia, with her uncanny intuition, had suggested it a few days earlier. "Mateo," she'd said, her eyes twinkling, "why don't you bring one of your own guitars tonight? Perhaps play that lovely Andalusian folk song Clara used to hum, just for yourself and for her memory. No pressure, of course." He had protested, naturally. His voice was rusty, his fingers out of practice for performance. But the idea had taken root. He had brought his most cherished instrument, one he had crafted for Clara years ago, its dark, polished wood inlaid with a delicate mother-of-pearl rosette. It rested now in its case beside his chair. The plaza buzzed with anticipation. Sophia's group danced with infectious enthusiasm, their movements a testament to the joy of shared activity. Then it was Miguel's turn. He sat on a simple wooden chair, the restored guitar gleaming under the festive lights. He played a sweet, melancholic malagueña, his fingers, though gnarled with age, moving with surprising dexterity. The crowd listened in appreciative silence, and when he finished, the applause was warm and genuine. Mateo felt a surge of quiet pride. During a natural pause in the festivities, as people milled about, refilling their glasses of wine and plates of tapas, Sophia caught Mateo's eye. She gave him an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. Don Rafael beside him placed a comforting hand on his arm. "The night is beautiful, Mateo," he said softly, "and music makes it more so." Mateo's heart hammered against his ribs. He looked at the guitar case, then at the expectant, friendly faces around him. He thought of Clara, of her laughter, of her unwavering love for music, for life. He took a deep breath. "Para ti, mi amor," he thought. "For you, my love." His hands trembled slightly as he unlatched the case and lifted out the beautiful instrument. The polished wood felt cool and familiar beneath his fingers. He settled it on his lap, adjusted the strap. A hush fell over the small group nearby who had noticed his movement. He began to play, his fingers finding the chords of an old Andalusian folk song, Nana de Sevilla, a haunting lullaby Clara had adored. His voice, when he started to sing, was indeed raspy at first, thin and uncertain. But as he continued, fueled by memory and a surge of emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel for so long, it gained strength, clarity, a quiet poignancy. He wasn't performing for applause. He was offering a piece of his heart, a tribute to a love that transcended even death. He sang of orange blossoms and moonlit nights, of longing and enduring affection. He closed his eyes, lost in the melody, in the memories. When he opened them, he saw Sophia smiling through glistening tears. Don Rafael's weathered face was etched with a deep, compassionate understanding. Other familiar faces in the small crowd watched him, their expressions soft, moved. In that moment, under the velvet star-strewn Andalusian sky, surrounded by the gentle murmur of the fiesta, the scent of jasmine and wood smoke in the air, Mateo Valdés felt a profound sense of connection. Connection to Clara's enduring spirit, to his rediscovered passion, to the community that had patiently, lovingly welcomed him back from the shadows. It wasn't a grand, dramatic revelation, but a quiet, powerful moment of catharsis, of peace, of re-emergence. The silence within him had finally been broken, replaced by a song. The remaining summer months unfolded with a new, gentle cadence for Mateo. His grief had not vanished. It was a part of him now, a tender scar rather than an open wound, but it was integrated into a life that was once again touched by purpose and quiet joy. His workshop was no longer a dusty mausoleum. It was active, alive. He took on occasional small commissions, tasks that brought him satisfaction rather than stress, restoring an old bandurria for a neighbor's grandson, crafting a simple ukulele for Sophia's music group at the Centro, even beginning to sketch designs for a new classical guitar. Just because, he told himself, the familiar creative itch, a welcome sensation. He took on occasional small commissions, tasks that brought him satisfaction rather than stress, restoring an old bandurria for a neighbor's grandson, crafting a simple ukulele for Sophia's music group at the Centro, even beginning to sketch designs for a new classical guitar. He found a particular delight in mentorship when Maria, a bright teenager from the village with a passion for music, shyly asked if he could show her the basics of Luthier. He agreed, and her eager questions and quick learning filled his workshop with a youthful energy it hadn't known in years. He was a regular and valued participant in Alumbra's communal life. Sophia's Movimiento Vital classes were now a genuine pleasure, the gentle exercise invigorating, the camaraderie uplifting. He often brought his guitar, and after the movements, a small group would gather as he played old folk songs, their voices joining his in tentative harmony. Don Rafael's garden remained his sanctuary, a place of peace and productive labor. He experimented with growing his own herbs, basil, thyme, oregano, for his increasingly adventurous cooking. finding a simple satisfaction in nurturing life from seed to harvest and sharing the bounty with his friends. He attended local cultural events, lectures, even a small art exhibition in a neighbouring town, his curiosity about the world slowly, steadily reawakening. David visited from Madrid in late August. He had been prepared for an improvement, but he was visibly moved by the transformation in his father. The haunted look in Matteo's eyes was gone, replaced by a calm clarity. His stoop was less pronounced, his movements more fluid. He laughed easily. They spent hours talking, truly talking, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. David spoke of his work, his hopes, his own struggles, and Matteo listened, truly listened, offering not judgment, but the quiet wisdom he had gleaned from his own journey through sorrow. As David prepared to leave, he hugged his father tightly. "I'm so glad, Papa," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Clara would be so happy." Matteo simply nodded, his own eyes moist. The final scene unfolded on a warm evening in early September. The fierce heat of high summer had mellowed into a balmy embrace. Matteo, Sofia, and Don Rafael sat at an outdoor table at Bar El Ciego in the bustling Plaza Mayor. The air was alive with the clatter of tapas plates, the murmur of conversations, the laughter of children playing their eternal game of tag around the old stone fountain. The scent of grilled gambas and strong coffee hung in the air. They shared a plate of boquerones fritos and patatas bravas, a bottle of robust local red wine breathing on the table between them. Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences and shared laughter. "That new variety of tomato, Matteo," Don Rafael was saying, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "The Corazon de Buey. You must try it. I've saved some seeds for you. They need a bit more sun than the Roma, but the flavour, magnifico." "I'll find a good spot for them," Matteo promised, smiling. "Perhaps near the rosemary. And Sofia, that new song you were humming today? The one with the tricky rhythm?" Sofia laughed, a rich, melodious sound. "Ah, yes! A challenge for us all, I think. But we'll master it for the autumn festival. And you, Matteo, you must play the accompaniment. Your guitar makes all the difference." Matteo felt a familiar warmth spread through him. He looked around the plaza at the familiar sights and sounds of Alhambra. The whitewashed walls glowed golden in the fading light. The swallows swooped and darted around the church tower. He was no longer a ghost observing from the shadows, a silent, solitary figure on the periphery. He was here, present, a part of the vibrant, enduring tapestry of his village. He raised his glass. "To good friends," he said, his